I'm Scott Osterwald. I'm the creative director at the MIT Education Arcade, and which is part of, probably not worth going into the detail, but it's part of comparative media studies and the teacher education program here at MIT. And we've been the host for Sandbox for how many years now?
7 or 8.
Yeah, 7 or 8. So I remember when Claire Green and Wendy first started Sandbox Summit a number of years ago, before they even started doing it here, they asked me to be on the advisory board, and I remember, I didn't know Wendy at the time, Claire calling me and asking me if, that she wanted to do something that was really about the importance of play, and I thought that was great because that's something I had been talking about for a while. And at that point, a lot of, it was, I mean, we're not the first person to talk about it, but it wasn't so much part of the conversation as it is now. So it's nice now to hear so many people talking about play and its importance. And in fact, I think we've moved into that era where we're so enthusiastic about it that I think we sometimes overshoot it a little bit, and hubris sets in. So every now and then, our language shifts into sort of talking about as if we are inventing play or as if we're bestowing play upon children. And I think, you know, there are certainly those circumstances. We heard about one effort where kids growing up in particularly horrendous or difficult circumstances need help in recovering their ability to play, and those are real, and that's, I can't imagine doing anything more worthwhile than that. But leaving aside that segment, the rest of the kids do know how to play. And in fact, we hominids have been around for 4 million years, and we've been playing the whole time. Play has been part of our nature, and in fact, I would argue that play is actually the reason we crave freedom as organisms is because we learn it through play. We learn about, I would say that play, our essential nature is about play, and it's about freedom, and so we don't need to bestow that on very many people or invent it. But that doesn't mean we don't have something important to do. We can always try to make interesting things to play with, and there the challenge is make it more interesting than a stick, because after all, a stick is an interesting thing to play with, and you'd be surprised how many things are not as interesting as a stick. But we have work to do making things that are interesting, that are interesting to play with. But the other thing I think that we can do, and I hear many of us doing it, and I think this is important, is figuring out how to remove the impediments to play. And whether that is schools that are sort of doing it wrong, parents who are too over-involved, perhaps, too, I don't know, too controlling. I mean, we need to work on them. We need to work on workplaces where play isn't happening enough, because, in fact, it's not just kids who need to play. We all need to play more. And so I think thinking about those two missions, making things interesting to play with and removing the impediments to play are really worthwhile, and it's been exciting to hear all the things that people are doing on those two fronts. And so with that, again, welcome to MIT. I hope we'll be able to do this for the indefinite future, to have you coming. And with that, I think I'll simply introduce our first speaker, who is from IDEO, Head of Kids Digital, Michelle Lee. Welcome, Michelle.
All right, can you hear me? Is the mic on? Awesome. So first off, I want to say thank you for having me here. I'm really excited to be here. I want to echo a little bit of what Scott just said, that it's incredible to see how important play is becoming in the daily conversations. And speaking with my colleagues, we kind of equate it to sleep and where sleep was a few years back. That before, everyone's like, sleep, you know, who needs it? It's not that important. And now everyone's really connecting it to growth and everyday function. So yeah, just looking forward to play just becoming more and more in the spotlight and really understanding the importance of it and how it can be integrated in everything, even beyond kids' play and toys and games. So I'm Michelle. I come from IDEO. IDEO is a human-centered design firm. I specifically come from IDEO's Toy Lab, which is based in Palo Alto. And we are very focused on play, and that usually manifests itself through toy invention. We also create iOS apps, and most recently we've been experimenting with Apple TV, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. And usually when you hear about IDEO, you hear about the products that we've just launched, and it's this nice shiny thing that comes at the end of this process. And today, I want to talk more about this messy stuff that comes at the beginning, the more ambiguous part of the process, because we really do pride ourselves in the process itself. And it's not just about the end product. It's about how we get there and what happens in between. And the Apple TV is no different. You see this especially with a lot of new technology, where you have a bit of a learning curve at the beginning when everyone's trying to figure out what's it good for, what are the benefits, what are the challenges. And everyone's just kind of experimenting at the beginning to try to get it right. And it takes a while to get there. So this is still a work in progress. And we are in that squiggle. So that is what I'm talking about at this point. So our journey starts September of last year in the fall when Tim Cook got on stage and announced this new Apple TV that was coming out. And he announced it saying the future of TV is apps. Really big, exciting stuff. It's like, wow, you can use your TV as a gaming console. You don't have to buy a separate device. And you don't even have to switch over the inputs when you decide to go from watching TV to gaming. So it becomes a seamless thing, something that's really easy for families to engage in. And as a developer, this was really exciting. So our team got excited about this. We're like, all right, great, what can we do? And when we have a lot of ideas in our head, we kind of jump to, all right, let's get them out, put them somewhere so we can see what we have cooking, which brings us to brainstorming. And this is what the typical brainstorm looks at IDEO. It's a lot of colorful Post-its, some quick and dirty sketches, and a few notes. And mostly it just helps us get these crazy ideas that are brewing in our head out. And some of these ideas are very half-baked. Some of them are totally ridiculous. But again, it's just like, how do we get them to some place where we can start talking about it, where we can build off of each other's ideas. And there might just be a kernel, but it could turn into something great later on. But keep in mind that when we did this brainstorm, this was right after the announcement, we hadn't actually played with an actual Apple TV, the new Apple TV, and we didn't really have a lot of information about what it was going to be. So as you can imagine, a lot of these ideas didn't pan out. So I'm going to go through a couple of these, kind of in the spirit of what we were talking about yesterday, where mistakes and false starts are OK. You kind of have to go through that to get to something great. And you have to be all right with throwing it out, having this culture where failure is OK. And we don't really call this failure. It's about just like get it out there, try things, see what happens. So first idea was, what can we do to kind of build off of one of our first apps called Balloonimals. And in this app, you can hold up your phone, and you blow into the mic to create a balloon, and then you can make a little balloonimal, and then you can play with it. But small screen, right? So the people in the back maybe couldn't see that. And we thought, wouldn't it be magical if you could do this on your Apple TV? Because now you blow into your little remote, and this giant balloon appears on stage. And wouldn't that be really, really cool? But unfortunately, as information came out, we found out you couldn't blow into the mic. The mic was reserved for Siri. So that idea went out the window. Maybe later on at some point, they'll give us access to the mic, and we can blow up magical balloons. But for now, that idea was shelved. So idea number 2. Could you take the remote and wave it in the air, and then magically your art piece appears on this screen, and everyone can be really proud of their masterpieces that they've created? And even though the remote has a gyroscope and accelerator, it just doesn't have enough motion detection to be able to translate what you're doing with the remote directly to the screen. So this was another idea that we had to shelve. So now we're like, OK, let's just do away with the remote altogether. We all saw that Crossy Road example where they had the iPad being used as a secondary device. We're like, great. If we can't get past the mic, if it doesn't have the motion detection we want, let's just use the touch device that kids are so great with. We know that they can manipulate things really easily. So maybe there's an idea where you can have pieces on a phone that you can give to a virtual pet, and then you can see what the pet does on screen. Kind of interesting, except that you have to use the remote. There has to be some play value you can get with the remote itself. You can't bypass that and completely just say, OK, use a touch device. So anyways, this is totally normal. We're used to having a few of the early ideas not quite work out. And at this point, we're like, OK, well, what's next? Kid testing. So this is a really important part of our process. As you can see, up to this point, first we didn't have a device, so that was a big issue. And then as a human-centered design firm, well, we hadn't actually involved any humans. So at this point, we bring the kids in, and we love this. I mean, every time we have any questions or we want to be inspired, we just call the kids in, and it's a great experience. It gets us all really energized. It helps ground us, help us remember who we're designing for and what some of the special hopes and fears and challenges that specific demographic might have. And in this example, this is more kids than we usually have in for a test, but we basically took over an IDEO party that was a family party, and we're like, hey, can we borrow your kids for a while? And brought them into this other room. Kid testing, we do use IDEO kids a lot, and they're still kids, but it's kind of nice because it gets over that barrier of they don't know us, they're shy, they don't know how to interact with new people, and they actually have a lot of the vocabulary to give us really interesting feedback. We also ask them to bring their friends, and we do bring in other kids as well, but we do rely very heavily on the IDEO kids because it's so easy to send a message to everyone in IDEO Palo Alto and say, anyone able to bring your kid in tomorrow? Because we have a question and we want to solve it. So we did the kid testing, and we found that there are kind of a variety of kids. So there's a whole age range here, and you can see the boys in the back, they have the remote. They're a little bit older. They're kind of junior gamers. And as soon as they saw this, they jumped at it. They're like, we want to try this. We want to see what we can do. And they're playing games like Alto's Adventure and Jetpack Joyride. So probably stuff that was a little bit more complicated. Some of the younger kids hung back a while, but they got curious after a while and wanted to grab the remote and give it a try as well. Other kids really enjoyed being spectators, and that was fine too. And they talked about how this was better than regular TV. So clearly, something resonated. This idea of interactive TV was great. And after the Post-its, we kind of had this moment where we said, is this really the right technology for kids? Just because something new comes out doesn't mean we have to automatically use it. The panel yesterday, they talked about, let's not do tech just for tech's sake. And we definitely take that to heart. So we weren't going to just use it because it was something new, because Tim Cook said that TV was the future of apps. We wanted to make sure that actually was good for this age range. And I think this test is what turned us around and said, okay, they're engaged, there's something there, but we have to figure out what it is. Because what was out there originally, we found often took this new TV, but used it for the traditional TV purposes. So the first apps, there are quite a few apps that were about watching video. Either that, or we saw a lot of developers kind of treating this new TV as just like a giant iPhone. So they were taking their iOS apps and porting it directly over to the TV, including the same actions that are much harder with a remote than they are with a touch screen. And this is totally understandable. I still totally commend everyone who got their apps out there early. We did not get our apps out when the Apple TV first launched. Because there is this trial and error. It's about figuring out what works. And the great thing about the digital space is that it's not like a physical product where you commit to tooling and you put all this investment in and you have to create a certain number of units. You can put this out, and then you can update it the next day and submit again and keep trying, which is what I really love about the software space. I mean, I started out on the physical product side. And when I got to software, I said, this is amazing, because this is actually the product design process. But now you can put things out. You're testing with people in real situations. You're getting feedback. And you can take this to keep improving over and over again. There really is no endpoint, no ta-da, where you say, I'm done. You can keep making it better. But still, we're like, OK, well, what do we do? How can we actually use the TV, new Apple TV, as an Apple TV and find out what it's really great for, so that we can design this fantastic experience that also works with kids? So this is where we go into experimenting. And we create prototypes. And the 3 rules for prototyping are rough, rapid, and right. So rough and rapid is so that you don't, one, sink a lot of investment into your early tests, because you have more permission to fail early and try these experiments if you're not blowing the entire budget on your experiments. So how do you get them out quick? How do you learn quickly? 2, you don't want to sink too much effort into it at the beginning, because if you put too many bells and whistles on it, the user actually gets distracted. So you might be trying to test one thing that's based on usability, but really they like the purple clouds up here, or something else aesthetically they just don't agree with, and they can't shake that to really test what you want to test. And 3rd, we like it to be rough and rapid, because if you sink too much effort into it, people tend to not want to hurt your feelings if they know you worked on it. And they'll be like, oh, it's great. I mean, kids are not as good about this. Adults, especially if you show them something you've worked on for a while, they're like, oh, it's fantastic. And it could be the worst thing in the world, but they're like, you worked on this, it's great, you did a fantastic job, way to go. Kids, to a certain extent, they could do that, but they are really brutally honest, which is also why we love bringing them often. And then write, because you have to know what question you're trying to answer. So in this test, we're just trying to figure out how does a kid interact with the TV? What kind of motions can they get out of the remote? And how does that reflect in the TV itself?
Wow, you're really good at this. Bless you.
Oh, Noah, you're doing that one?
Oh.
Oh, wrong way. Wrong way, Noah.
So from this, we can say he was definitely engaged. He was into it. You can hear his sister in the background who can't help but coach her. I mean, some things we were testing too, just, can you swing? When you swing, what happens? We found that kids, when they swing, they tend to, go back a little bit, adults too, but you kind of go back before you go this way. So directionally, you couldn't be like, okay, if you're aiming for this, a lot of times they'd get frustrated because the ball would go in the opposite direction. So some interesting things we learned there. But really, we pulled out these opportunities that got us excited. So number one, when a kid's not holding an iPad or an iPhone, that parents have always been like, don't drop that, be really careful with it. Now suddenly, they just have this remote and the screen's removed, the big glass object is up on the wall. They can now get off the couch and they can be a lot more active. It can be full body engagement, and kids love that. That's what they naturally do. So how do we take advantage of that? Secondly, we like to create an I did it moment in our apps. This was inspired from my daughter. She's 5.5 now, but when she was 4, she'd draw various art pieces, and she always signed it, Neve did it. And she loved taking that ownership. So how do we create that in the apps where there is a moment where kids feel really proud and they kind of want to showcase that to other kids, to the family members. But now on Apple TV, the I did it moment's on this huge screen, and chances are someone else did see it, and you can be celebrated for it, and it creates this excellent feedback loop where then they want to keep doing it, they want to keep mastering this activity. And third, this is probably what we were most excited about, was that it was a shared experience. So from that very first test that we used more for inspiration versus any kind of usability testing or validation, from that very experience, we already knew that the spectators were playing an important role, that they were getting so much out of this experience as well. So now we could be social. We could get to some of that love that came up in that first talk with RJ, and how do we connect with people and really share these experiences together. As another example, this is a video that actually one of the IDEO parents sent to me. He's like, hey, I just wanted you to know, we don't have a new Apple TV. This is our old Apple TV. But I took one of the apps and I just projected on the TV to see what would happen. And the kids had so much fun. You have to see this. I couldn't help myself. I videotaped it for you. And just to give you a little bit of background, so the game that's up there is called Monster Moves. And on the iOS app, it's really about choreography. So all these tiles float around with different dance moves, and the kids can pick 4 of them. They fall into the slots at the bottom, and then the monster dances. And so you've basically created a dance routine for the monster. And in this case, the children have already kind of said which 4 they have. Mom's holding an iPad or iPhone off to the side, and she's selected 4 moves, and they're in place. And so now the dancing begins. So really exciting for us to see, because these kids are clearly into it. The youngest child, Asher, he's 4, I believe, and his oldest sister, I think, is 9. And they're just having a blast. So this is something that actually appeals to all 3 kids. They're playing together, having a good time with it. You can hear the mom laughing, and she's helping to control all of it. So the family is really involved. The dad's filming. I think the only one not involved is the dog, who's trying not to get stepped on the floor over there. But yeah, this really opened our eyes. Like, this is cool, but also helped us see that maybe if we were to design our apps for TV, it might have a different use. So whereas Monster Moves on the iPad, where you have great touch control, was about how do you pick these tiles and learn to create dances, on the TV, because the selection is harder, it was much more about dancing and having this fun, active experience together and celebrating, learning silly dance moves, being silly as a group. So the other thing we did was we just really noticed how kids were interacting with it. And this gets to like, what are some of those challenges you have to overcome when you're designing for kids, and how is it different? So this is actually my daughter, this is Neve, and this is one of her first interactions using the Apple TV. And this test, as well as the one before, we didn't code anything for those. Those were just using existing apps that are out there, just trying to see what kids would do. And one thing you'll notice here is that when adults use the Apple remote, it's usually with one hand, and they're just using their thumb to navigate the touch screen. What Neve is doing is something we've seen across the board with all kids, is that they hold the remote in their dominant hand and then use their other hand to use the touchpad. And this is really important to see. This is something we actually saw with the iPhone at the very beginning. So whereas adults are really comfortable, doing things this way, a lot of the kids were using their iPhones horizontally. So a lot of our apps you'll see are in the horizontal landscape mode because they're heavy. So if you have little tiny hands, it falls over. If you put it this way, you have better leverage and can hold onto your phone. We actually created a mock-up that was to scale to our hands. So we made an iPhone that was like about this big and tried it ourselves. And you can also understand how far can you reach on that screen if you have little fingers. So just kind of some of the experiments that we'll do to try to understand. But here it was clear that as the kids were using the remote, they were using it in a different way. We're actually in the process of changing some of our tutorials on screen, because every once in a while you'll see a tutorial that just nudges kids to, it's time to swipe, it's time to press and click. And we kind of copied what was out there already, which is all the one-handed tutorials. We've played a little bit with the two-handed tutorials, and the kids get it faster because that's what they do, and rather than trying to struggle to mimic a one-handed move, which is really clumsy and frustrating. The other thing we found is that their gestures are much more, they blend together. So when you see what you can do in the developer's kit with Apple remote, they're like, oh yeah, you can swipe, you can tap, you can click, all these motions that can help distinguish and give you multiple options. Well, for a kid, swiping is really hard the younger you get, so kids get frustrated if they can't do that. And then tapping and clicking, what really is the difference? Like light touch versus pushing all the way down, that doesn't exist. So just 3 UI tips that we picked up through these observations. One is the need to be sequential, because if you can't choose between different things, you kind of have to offer what you can do one at a time. So Balloonimals, we had this option where in the iOS app, you could either swipe on top of or tap the animal itself, and the animal would animate and do something fun. You could tap the gift in the upper left and give a treat to your pet, or you could tap the bottle in the upper right, and that would inflate your balloon to the point that it finally burst, and then you can get a new animal. And in the TV version, we had to change it because asking a kid to be able to change the focus from one item to the next so that they can give a gift and then go back to the animal and then blow it up, just way too complicated. So instead, when the animal first appears, you can swipe, you can click, you can tap, anything will animate the animal. And one of those animations is also the treat where the present is given. And then at some point, you see the prompt that if you click now, it'll start blowing it up. If you want to keep swiping and you are older and you can do that, that's fine, you can keep playing with it. But otherwise, it just automatically changes any clicks to the act of inflating the balloon and popping. And we understand that this is a lot more directed play, and we really want to get to the point where kids have more freedom to explore. But again, this is an early test. This is something like, let's get it out there, see what we can do, start playing with this platform. And we realized that with this app, we couldn't just directly port it over. What did we have to do to make it still usable on the Apple TV? And again, work in progress, we're still learning. Would love to figure out how to make it so kids do have more options and can do more on the screen. The second tip was about being responsive. So, I mean, the iPhone, iPad were so revolutionary because now kids could do something on the screen and it happened right below their fingers. They could see that cause and effect immediately. Previous to that, kids could not use a mouse at all. They had no idea how this motion down here translated to what was happening on a computer screen. And we're kind of back to that now with the TV, where you have a screen up on the wall and you have something else you're holding in your hand. And this is especially true when something that was going on wasn't necessarily linked. So, you know, the animation's going on and you're not necessarily causing the animation, but if you're moving your remote around, you kind of want something to happen. So we introduced this fly, which at least now, you know, the kids can kind of see that they're moving their remote around. They can understand that there's cause and effect between what they're doing on their remote. And it actually gave them another fun way to interact because, you know, they'd kind of take the fly around and kind of try to tickle the animal and stuff, but they felt like they were doing something there. But that was just important so they didn't feel frustrated that the connection wasn't happening, that what they were doing on their remote wasn't quite making its way onto the action on the screen. And then providing multiple routes. And this is about still sequential, but how do you give them multiple ways to get there since we know that the actions get confused. So again, this is Monster Moves where you select the tiles. And there's kind of 3 modes of play. If you, again, are an older kid and you're great at swiping, you can change the focus and you can move from one tile to the next and choose which one you want, click, and then have that one fall into place. If you're younger and you're not good at swiping, you can just keep clicking. And as the focus is changing from one to the next, it'll just automatically drop whatever the focus is into that spot. And then lastly, if you don't even want to do that, you can just shake the remote and 4 randomly fall into place. So any kid can play, they can get past the screen, and they can get to the dancing part, which is a really fun part about the Apple TV app. And the other thing is if you're playing with your brothers and sisters, you don't really feel like you're playing a dumbed-down version. It's just you can all get there. It's just how you interact with it. You still get to the same place. So at this point, we have 3 TV apps out on the market. Again, these are our first attempts, and the fastest way to get there is to reuse assets. So this is why we have Balloonimals Babies, and Monster Moves up there. But again, each one has been really thoughtfully redone so that it wasn't just taking what we had and putting it up there. And we're starting to see that as well. We see other developers starting to get it, starting to understand what the TV is really great for, understanding there's separate interactions that should be on the phone and the tablet versus what is on the TV itself. So that's really fun to see that, you know, can you do more creation on the device that's handheld and then have other kinds of interaction that are great in a shared environment that might get kids more active on the screen itself. So we're continuing to develop. We have a couple more that we hope to have come out in the next couple months, and those are completely new, completely different things that we've developed more with the TV itself in mind. This is a great time to start working with Apple TV. There's about 5,000 apps as of March that Apple's reported as being on the Apple TV, which is far fewer than what is in the App Store for iOS. So if you put something out there now, it will actually be seen, most likely, and you'll get people using it. And these are the early adopters. There's not a whole big audience right now, which also gives you a great chance to experiment and get results without fearing that you're, you know, putting something out there that way too many people are seeing early on in too early stages. So again, remember, it's an iterative process. You can continue to update. So great to get something out there and just start seeing where you can go with it. So that's kind of the messy process. Thank you so much for listening. I mean, feel free to contact me at Michelle at IDEO, but I'm also happy to take any questions now. Do I have time for it? I do, okay. Any questions? Oh.